Namaste. So if we're going to tackle the really big questions in life, I thought, why not ask the mother of all questions? What is reality? Now this has been a philosopher's question for thousands of years, and I'm not claiming here to have an answer for you, but I just want to engage in a dialogue with you to try and find out if we can get some little insights into reality. Why do we need to know? Well, simply from a personal perspective, if I'm going to move forward through life, I want to know where I am. I want to know the nature of my current state, the environment that I'm in. I want to know that point exactly so that I may know in which direction I need to go. So, what is the nature of reality? Where shall we start? Let's start one aspect, many aspects to look at, but let's look at one aspect. Let's look at it from a personal perspective. Is something real? Is the world real? It certainly feels real to me. Doesn't it feel real to you? I can see objects, I can touch them, I can smell them, taste them, hear them, and they appear to be there all the time, and I go to sleep, I wake up, and the objects are still around me. It seems pretty real to me. So, from a personal perspective, yes, a real world seems quite plausible. But how are we having those perceptions? Through our sense organs. And as we've said before, the sense organs are effectively all coming in. Excuse my drawing, but I failed in O-level art. So, rather a big head, but Big's a bright guy, that's all. So, all our senses, the eyes, nose, mouth, ear, and the skin for touch, all of those are feeding back, if you like, information. It's all going into our mind. Our mind is effectively then like a movie screen. It's playing out all the information that's gathered from these five senses. There's the skin as well. And through this, we see the whole world played out in our minds. And we're aware of that. So, something that we're seeing, are we seeing it? Or are we seeing what the effect of our mind seeing it is? And the truth is that everything that we perceive in our mind. And we color it with our memory. We analyze it, choose it with our intellect, and we own it through our ego. It's all in the mind. So, is what we see in the mind the same as the outside world? We have no idea. Since we have no way of directly seeing the outside world. Because everything we take in through our senses. So here we are, living out our entire life in this world, thinking that we are in the world. But in fact, the world is within us. That's the only world we see. We see no other world. And we certainly know that the world looks the way it does because of the capabilities of our senses. We can't smell as well as dogs, thank goodness, otherwise it'll be a stinky place to be. We can't see as well as hawks, or hear as well as bats. So our senses are limited to our body frame, and within that we have a world within our head. Now, it's certainly true that if I carried on walking in a straight line, I would eventually hit a wall. So there is something out there. It's just that I only have my mind telling me what that might be. And whether that equals what is outside is anybody's guess. Certainly your guess. Certainly we believe what we see in our mind is what is in the outside world, and maybe that's all you need. But I wanted to know. I mean, believing is fine, but I don't want to just believe that the outside world reality is the way it is. I would like to know. So that is number one, is a personal experience. So if we want to know something for real, they say, always ask somebody bright, an engineer maybe, a scientist, a physicist. Okay, let's ask a physicist. So, 300 years ago, Newton said, the entire world behaves like this. This is what reality is all about. It's like a clockwork machine. The planets, the suns, the galaxies move around like this. This is the nature of gravity. We can predict what is going to happen, and as a result, this solid, materialistic view of the world is reality. Interesting. And certainly the mathematics for large body physics seems to work out quite well. Newton was a bright guy, from all accounts. All that apple dropping and things, and it did him no harm. So, but the problem is that what Newton was talking about was the physical universe. It was the part that is matter in our universe. And take a guess. What's the percentage of the universe that is matter? 70? 50? 25. It can't be less than 25. It's 4% of the universe is matter. The rest, the 96%, is dark energy and dark matter that we have a great deal of trouble finding. But we do know that 4% is real matter. And to make the equations work, we add constants. We add big K's and things like that to equations, and they balance out beautifully. And that's how we deal with 4%. But that's not the end of the story. Of the 4%, only 0.1% is visible. So, that means all the galaxies, all the stars, all the planets, comets, everything gathered together, if you put all of that mass together, it comes to 0.1% of the universe. The rest, 3.9%, is intergalactic dust that is just out there in space. So, the entire Newtonian physics model of reality based on matter is based on the 0.1% of the universe that we can see. Now, if you had a theory and you took it to somebody and you said, 99.99% of my field of study I don't know about, but actually this does work out for the 0.1%, what would they say? Yes, exactly. Well, when Newton brought up all of this stuff, of course nobody knew about dark matter and things like this. So it's all very well to say I have a perfectly good mechanistic view about 0.1% of the universe, but I want the 99.9% explained as well. So enter about 200 years after Newton, and the quantum mechanics, the quantum physics guys came on board. Starting from around about 1920 something, and in the 30s they were having a heyday. And what did they say? Now, they said something very interesting. They said, there's no such thing as matter. Matter is the solid particles that you and I know. Is what makes a noise like that, right? They said there's no such thing as matter. Whoa, excellent. Then what is it? They said matter can be both a solid in terms of a particle with mass, or it can be a wave of potential, a wave of energy. And what transfers this wave into a particle with mass is the observer. This is physics people talking now. So you suddenly have all of these waves of potential energy, and they suddenly transform into particles of matter when there's an observer observing them. Let's give me my lashes. There you go. Big eyelashes. That's what they said. Now, interesting that they should say that you need the observer before you can see the particles. Either that is a probability wave. Do you remember when you and I went to school, we had all these atomic diagrams, and even the National Physical Laboratory or something, or the Atomic Institute, used to have a sign that sort of had a nucleus in the middle, and they would go into sort of wild curves like this and like that, and we were told that, yes, that's the electrons whizzing around. All right? And you can imagine it's like a planetary system, isn't it? And that's the sun, and all the planets are whizzing around, and the different number of electrons at different planes, at different areas, they denoted different different compounds, different atoms. That's not true. Not from what those guys said in quantum physics. In fact, they said there are electrons, but we don't know where they are. They are potentially everywhere. You can only detect an electron at a particular place when you observe it. And when you don't observe it, it can be anywhere. Indeed, they find that electrons can move between levels around nucleus. So you can imagine electrons at this level, but there may be electrons at higher levels. And they seem to move from one state to the other instantly. There is no interim bit. It doesn't take any time for an electron to go from the lower state to the upper state. i.e., the electron can be anywhere. In fact, Einstein once said, maybe there's only even one electron for all of matter. It can be in anywhere except when observed, and then when it's observed, you know exactly where it is. So this really is very strange in terms of trying to answer my question, what is reality? Reality is solid matter as long as there's an observer. And if it isn't, it's just a probability wave without mass. Literally, it's just energy, infinite potential. It can be anything, and it's just out there like a mass of energy, and then you observe it, and it becomes real. Interesting. Now, a third viewpoint we could take is the way the wisdom traditions of the East looked at matter. And they started to look at it, obviously, just through a self-realization. They just went into meditation, and the rishis just saw this. So Vedanta is the oldest set of information that we have. And they have a very interesting view on matter and on reality. First of all, they define reality as something that is always true, and independent of anything else. So reality is independent I'm about to crash into an electron there. So reality is independent of anything else. That is real. You think, well, what's independent of anything else? For a start, if I look at a pen, this solid pen exists in space. All right? So it's not independent of anything else. It exists in time. Presumably there was a time when this pen was before its manufacture, and there will be a time when it will be no more. So in the definition of Vedanta, from the wisdom traditions, this pen is not strictly speaking real. Reality is independent, which means primarily is independent of time. So that which has existed in the past exists now and will exist in the future is real. Interesting. For something to have existed in the past and existing now and existing future means that it does not change. It can't change. Because if it changes, like this pen is no longer is, like I am no longer am, I wasn't in the past, I'm in the present, I won't be in the future. How many things fall into this category of reality? Very few, as it turns out. But we'll talk about that later. What I want to talk about now is how this idea of reality that this has ties into an everyday object. Here I have a table. I know what you're going to say. It's a very small table. Surely nobody can have dinner on that. And you'd be absolutely right. This is a table, all right. And it's a wooden table, but it happens to be a doll's table. Simply because my arms aren't strong enough to lift a real table and show you. So here is a table. Seems perfectly solid to me. If I were to ask you, is this table real? What would you say? You'd say, silly question. Of course it's real. Okay. And I would say, what is this table made of? And you'd say, it appears to be made out of wood. And you'd be right. It's a wooden table. A wooden table because, as opposed to a plastic table or a glass table or a steel table. You're absolutely right. So it's a wooden table. So if I were to ask you, this lovely solid wooden table, what is its weight? You say, I haven't a clue. You're holding it, you tell us. All right, let's say about 200 grams, okay? 200 grams. And if I were to ask you, the table weighs 200 grams, what does the wood weigh? What would you say? Say, well, the wood weighs 200 grams as well because it's a wooden table. So is the table and the wood the same thing? In this case it is. I would say, then why isn't it the same word? If I wanted another table, would I say to you, bring me some wood? And you'd bring a table to me. Clearly, they're not the same thing. So they're different, except I can't separate them. I can't say, here, you take the wood, I'll keep the table. It doesn't work, does it? Table seems to be in a very strange no man's land. Because if the wood weighs 200 grams, this solid table doesn't weigh anything. It's solid matter, but without weight. Strange. So it can't be matter if it has no weight, because matter has mass, right? This table is a concept. It's an idea. And I can prove that because I can take, even though it's tiny, I can cut this up into a small chair with 4 legs. It'll look like a chair, honest. Where would the table go? If I made this into a wooden chair, where has the table gone? It's a concept. It's a concept that we have for a particular form that we call a table. And we do this for practically all objects. But let's keep it on the table. So, the table is dependent on the wood. By the way, a concept like that we have and utilize every day, in Sanskrit, they call mithya. M-I-T-H-Y-A. Mithya. It's a dependent reality. What does that mean? It means that this table is dependent on its underlying wood. If there was no wood, there would be no table. There can be wood without the table. We can have a wooden chair or just wood on its own, but we can't have the table without the wood. The table is dependent on the wood, and the wood in this case is the reality of this table, and the Sanskrit for reality is satyam. S-A-T-Y-A-M. That is independent reality. Mithya is dependent reality. But is the wood really satyam? Is it a independent reality? The wood is made out of what? It's made out of fibers, cellulose fibers. So the cellulose fibers then must be the satyam, they are the independent reality, and the wood is the mithya, right? And what are the fibers made out of? They're made out of molecules. And therefore the molecules are in a position to say that they are the satyam. And we go down and down. So the molecules are made out of atoms. Are atoms satyam? The atoms are made out of subatomic particles. Are they satyam? Below subatomic particles, what do you have? What you have is pure, raw energy. Just energy. That's everywhere. This table, this concept of a table, is that energy manifested in a name and form that we call a table. And that raw energy has a word in Sanskrit. That raw energy, the source of everything to come, is called Brahman. B-R-A-H-M-A-N. Literally meaning big. Has to be big because it's the source of everything else. It is the potential energy. It is the infinite possibility from which all objects are ultimately made, including this wooden table. And that, by the way, we've seen before. Potential energy without mass, ready to be transformed into all matter, is what the quantum physics guys said. But they said it 4,000 years later. They still did it as a theory when they said it, but they only said it 90 years ago. These guys said it a few thousand years before Christ. So what we have is an infinite possibility of waves of energy, right? These can be transformed into matter in the presence of the observer. The observer is awareness, is consciousness. In the presence of consciousness, all matter comes to be. Literally, consciousness produces matter. Boy, is that different to everything we know. Everybody else thinks that matter came along and then woof, suddenly the brain got large enough for consciousness to be. And what the sages of the old, the sages of the new are telling us is that consciousness makes energy into matter. Matter is reality. That is what reality is all about. Interesting? Glad you like it. Namaste.